by just Nikki. All right. So this is don't panic. This is the only slide where you'll have to take notes.
Okay.
And I've created a handout with, this is the short version of the link, but the link is also in the top of the chat. And this video will be posted on the church's YouTube channel. And if all else fails, you can email me at that address, which is both here and in the chat, and it's at the end of the talk. So I need, how do I? There are 2 new databases that became available recently. The 1950 census, the summary information has been available for decades. But what is new is that as of April 1st, the detailed information, the actual forms with the names of the people in each household and other information about them, became public on April 1st. So that is the first database I'll be talking about. The second database I'll be talking about is just prior to that, New York City released online a large trove of vital records. These are from the municipal archives. They had been available if you wrote to the municipal archives and paid $15 for each document. You were able to get copies, but now the images of the actual documents are available online. So going ahead. So the 1950 US Census, why should you be interested in it? As I'm sure you all know, we do the census because the Constitution requires it, and it's used to determine representation in Congress. But genealogists have developed other uses for this information. And it tells us who, as I said, who was in the household and ages and occupations and all sorts of other stuff. Sorry. So here are a few fun facts about the 1950 census. There are approximately 45 million homes, and the population was 151 million. And one thing that's different from now is the percentage of women who worked in the census, et cetera, et cetera. So, so what questions did the census ask? It starts with address. It asks if it's a farm or ranch. It asks the name. It asks the relationship to the head of household, race, sex, age, marital status, state or country of birth, naturalization status, occupation and industry, and several other questions about employment. So we get this, as I said, that there are millions and millions of households. So how do you find the one you want? Well, somebody needed to create an index by name so that you could just type a name in and have the correct record come up. This time, for the first time, Ancestry.com used handwriting recognition software to create a preliminary index. And that was released to the public. And then volunteers at the Mormon website, familysearch.org, have been reviewing this index to correct any mistakes and to add additional information. And it's only been in the last couple of weeks that they've finished doing that, and that now all 48 states are available on their website. And the National Archive also has a way to search the census, but their user interface is not very good, and I would not recommend going there. At this time, you'll see the most complete and easiest to use index on Ancestry. Sorry. I need to go back here. Hold on. I need to. So here is access to the night. Although Ancestry is a commercial website that normally charges you money, access to the 1950 US Census is free. That said, you'll either need to access it at the Belmont Public Library or create a free account to use at home. There's a link in the website about creating a free account on Ancestry, and you'll be able to follow the instructions there. Let me just say, this free account is different than the free 2-week trial. The free two-week trial is they ask you for a credit card, and then you have 2 weeks to cancel it with that and to get a full refund. This free account is truly free, and they do not ask you for a credit card. So I went over the details of that, but we can skip. So once you are logged in, what you wanted to find the US Census, what you do is you go to Ancestry, and then you click on search, and then you go down to card catalog. And you'll get a page that looks like this. And then over here where it says the title of what you're searching, you'll type in 1950 and then hit search. And you'll get a result that looks like this. When I did this yesterday to check it, there was actually something else before the 1950 US Census, but you should be able in this list pretty quickly to find the 1950 US Census. And if you click on this, you end up here, which is where we're trying to do. And there's this search area down here, which I'm now going to zoom in on. And I decided to search for Marilyn Monroe. And I put in her name, I put in her year of birth, and I put in her location. Now, the trick is Ancestry has a fairly sophisticated search function. And so if you don't know any of this information exactly, put in your best guess, and Ancestry will try to give you the closest match. In this case, I came and I got this result here. A Marilyn Monroe in Beverly Hills, California, who was born, she claimed to have been born around 1929. That's not quite the birth year I had for her, but it's pretty close. And the California. You'll notice there are many other Marilyn Monroes in the country, but I think this is the one of interest. Before I go on to show you the results of the search, I just want to point out, if we hadn't found this result that we think is the right one, you can go up here, upper left where the red circle is, and click on the little pencil. And that will give you some fields that you can fill in with any other additional information about the person you're looking for. Other members of the household, where you think they might be living, any of that other information. But in this case, we got a pretty good match right here. So we're going to click on that, and that takes us to this summary information. Now, one caution about this is this is the information. Somebody looked at the form, one of the volunteers, and then typed in all this information. So there's sometimes errors in the information. In particular, in this case, I want you to, the street name, they say it's Fountain, and I'll show you in a minute why that's not correct. So you always, if you can, go look at the image. And here is the image. And Ancestry has helpfully highlighted the row that we're interested in. I'll zoom in on that in a minute, but before I do that, I wanted to highlight a couple of things here. One is up here in the upper left. We have the state, the county, and the city. So California, Los Angeles, Beverly Hills. And then this number, the 19-216, that's what's known as an enumeration district. And that basically is the area that the census taker could walk in one day. And I'll get back to that a little bit later. And then on the top, over in the right, there's a page number. In this case, it's 77. And I'll get back to that in a minute about why that's an unusual thing. But now I want to look at the row that actually has Maryland's information in it. Here I've zoomed in, and it's a little bit hard to read in this zoomed in. But remember I told you the street on the summary information said Fountain? Well, if you look here, it's cut off, but this is North Harper in the upper left, right here. So she actually lived at 1301 North Harper, and I've checked other sources, and that's correct. So whoever transcribed it made a mistake. 161 is how many houses or residences the census taker has visited that day. And then skipping over, it's not a farm, there are no acres. Her name is Marilyn Monroe, which we all know was not her original name, but it's the one she was using at this point in time. She was the head of household. She was a white female, and she gave her age of 21. So as with many women, they get younger and younger in subsequent censuses. So this is the same line, but looking a little bit further over to the right. She is divorced. This D here is divorced, and she lived in California. She was born in California. She worked the previous week but only for 8 hours. And then she gave her occupation as actress in a motion picture studio. So, and then these last 4 columns, the worker class and these codes, they really don't contain any useful information. The codes in particular were added later at the census office and were not information that was recorded by the census taker. While we're here and zoomed in, I just want to point out something. You'll notice that certain rows, like row 6 here, have a circle around them. That means that person was asked some extra questions. And if you look down at the bottom of the page, you'll see this, and you'll see here, you can, on the left, you can find row 6. And those were the extra questions that person was asked. They didn't seem to answer them very well, but you can see from the others that you can get some additional information down here. I'm not going to go into this in detail, but just if the person you're interested in happens to fall into one of those rows, look at the bottom of the page. And so that is how you research the census by name. But what if you don't? All right, but the name index may not be always right. You may not find it that way. If you don't find it that way, what you need to do is search by address. Let me just say that searching by address is a cumbersome procedure. And in the handout, there's a link to a page by Steve Morse. He and his friend Joel Weintraub have created a tool to help find them by address. just to give you an idea of what's involved, is the first thing you need is the full address. House number, street, city, county, and state. Where are you going to find this? Well, you have to think about what other information you have. You might have a birth certificate for a child that was born to that family. You might have old letters, or you or somebody in your may have known these people. The other things is you might check city directories. Behind their paywall, ancestry.com has a number of city directories. Maybe you'll get lucky and find them there. And as I said, you can access them for free at the Belmont Public Library. Or if you have a paid Ancestry account. Or you could try calling the local library of where you think the person might have lived, and they might be able to look it up for you. One good source is the World War II draft cards that were filled out in the mid-40s by all men. Those are available both on familysearch.org, which is free, or on ancestry.com. And another possibility is to look in the 1940 US Census, which is available, again, both on Family Search and on Ancestry and other websites. I'm sorry. The additional information, okay, you need is the county. And I usually just Google the city and state. Like if I Google Belmont, Massachusetts, I'll find a little thing that says Middlesex. And then you'll need to find the nearest cross street. So you look on Google Maps and you and for the address you're looking at, and then you look at what are the two corners. And only when you have this information are you ready to proceed. Now, remember when we were looking at the census page, I talked about that funny number that was like 19-261, I believe it was. Well, that's the enumeration district, the area covered by a enumerator or census taker in one day. Is and so you have to find that. So you go to Steve Morse's website, you enter the state, county, and city, you enter the house number and street name, you enter the nearby cross streets, and hopefully that will have narrowed down the list of those districts to just one or two. And then you can click through and actually see the census documents for that enumeration district. But then you have to page through page by page till you find the one you're interested in. And they're often 20 or 30 pages to look at. All right. Remember when we were looking at Marilyn Monroe, in the upper right-hand corner, there was the page number, it was 77. Mm-hmm. What happened, the reason this happened is she wasn't home the first time they came around. So the census taker came back another day, and that time she was home. And so when it was done on the second day, the page number will be 70 or higher. So you'll see pages like 1 through 25, and then suddenly the page numbers will skip to 70. It's not that there ever were pages 26 through 69. Those never existed. It's just they did page 77. So that. So there was a lot of other information taken in the census, like they asked about the house, the physical house and how many rooms it had, whether it had indoor bathrooms, and all sorts of things. unfortunately, that information was not preserved. So the only information that's for individual households, so the only information that's available online right now is what similar to what we saw from Marilyn Monroe. So let me go back to my Zoom. And now I've stopped sharing my screen. And so the question is, are there any questions about the 1950 census? And I will look in the chat. And I don't see any in the chat. So does anybody have questions?
Well, Marion, I was asking about death notices. Is there any reference to that or any
No.
obituary?
Not in the census. There are many other online sources for that. And I'll get to the, but the census, it's only living people.
Oh, okay. But you might be looking up somebody who's dead.
They wouldn't be listed.
Oh, they wouldn't be listed. Okay.
Their spouse might be listed as a widow or widower. That would be the only indication that you have that they had died. And the fact that they were absent from the household.
You find children in the census?
Yes, they list everybody who is residing. That's a good question, Nicole. Everybody who's residing in that household. So whether it's a freestanding house, an apartment, or whatever, that's considered a household.
Not necessarily voters, but just
residents.
Live there. Okay.
Yeah, but at both naturalized, both citizens and non-citizens. That was a big issue in this last census.
Yeah, that's what I asked you. Yeah.
Okay. So everybody, we're doing well on time. We're about halfway through. If there's interest at the end, I can stay on for a little while and I can actually step you through an example of that process of finding it by address, because that was a lot to take in very quickly, but I don't want to take the time to do that right now. So what I'm going to do is and for the one or two people who came on late, in the chat, you'll find a link to the handout, which has the links to all these pages that I'm referencing, like how to get to, it'll take you directly to that 1950 search page on Ancestry. And it also has an email address for me, although you can use any of my email addresses to email me if you have any questions. So we're all going to take a deep breath and relax. And now we're going to go on to the New York Vital Records. And what do these records cover? I'm primarily going to be talking about the records at the municipal archives. And as I've said, these have been available either if you went to the archives in person or if you paid them $15 and they would send it to you. But now they are available online. Now, if you notice, the years are not current. 1909 is the latest birth certificate, 1937 for marriages, 1949 for marriage licenses, and 1948 for deaths. Some are still being digitized, and depending on the borough, some years may be missing. But it's thousands and thousands of records, and so it's much better than what we had before. So there are other New York City vital records, which I may talk about in passing. They are held at the city, some are held at the city clerk's office, and there was recently published an index to marriages from some of those records. This is an index and not the original document but it's better than nothing. But citing privacy concerns, they're reluctant to release anything more. So again, there are two ways of searching these records. The one that I find the easiest, and I'll give you an example in a minute, is searching by name. However, the search functionality of this website is such that it only does an exact match. So if you put Bob instead of Robert, it's not going to find it. Still, it's a good place to start. And I'm going to give you an example. I'm going to look up a birth record for Arthur Alexander, son of Ignaz Alexander and Regina Alexander. And the first thing I do is I follow this link to the New York Records and Information Services. And again, the link is in the handout. And it takes me to this page. So first thing I notice at the top, I scroll down on that page. The top is to search by certificate number, which I'll get to later. So you scroll down on this page and you see this, and you're going to search by name. And the certificate type is that we're interested in for this example is birth certificate. Although if you click on this little arrow here, you can choose the other types of certificates. And then I filled in the last name, the first name, the borough, and the year. Now, don't worry, again, the borough and the year, if you don't know them exactly, I'll show you how to deal with that later. But for right now, I'm going to enter that and hit search. And it comes up with two possible records, which isn't too bad. So I clicked on the first one and I saw this. This is the actual birth certificate. But the thing I noticed about this right away is the father's name is Morris Alexander and the mother's name was Tilly Alexander. And while I recognize those as relatives of mine, this is not the son of Ignaz and Regina, which is the one I said we were looking for. So I had to go back and look at the second document. And here I see, here is Ignaz, and here is Regina. And let's just take a minute and look and see what this certificate tells you. It gives you the child's name, their sex, their color, their date of birth, their address for the birth, the father's name, the father's address, where the father was born, and how many years they're living, so their age. And then going up to the other column, he was a butcher. The mother's name was Regina Alexander. And actually, mother's name before marriage is Alexander, and that's correct. In this case, both her maiden name and her married name were Alexander because she and her husband were actually second cousins. And the mother's residence, she was born in Hungary. She's 35 years old. And this is the first child. So, what do you do if you don't know the borough or the exact year of birth? All is not lost. So here, I went back to that same website and scrolled down to where it said by name. I said, I'm looking for a birth certificate for Alexander Arthur, but this time, just as in order to show you what happens, I put in a different borough and a different birth year, and I hit search. And I got to here. It says, there are no results. But now it gives me some choices. Right now, I want you to look at this line here and notice that there are little X's beside each number. And we want to keep the birth certificate. We want to keep the last name. We want to keep the first name. But I can hit the X next to where it says Brooklyn, and I can hit the X next to where it says the year, and then hit search. And so now it's giving me all Arthur Alexander's birth certificates. And there are 13 of them. You can't see them all because they're cut off at the bottom of the screen, but there are 13 vital records. I want to next just show you up here, you have this under year range. Right now it's looking from 1855 to 1949. If you have an idea of when they were born, like if you have the parents' marriage licenses, the child is usually born after the parents get married. Or if you have a death date for one of the parents, the child's usually born before that parent dies. And you can use these sliders, these purple sliders here, to narrow the range of years. Also, you could put over here under borough. Right now it's searching all boroughs. And you can use this pull down menu to select any one borough. And that might reduce the number of documents that you need to look through. So, but looking at all 13, I noticed this one down here, and I'm going to zoom in on that. And I'm still can't see the record, but there's this code that I've circled here in red. I just wanted to explain that to you. The B means looking for a birth record. The M means it's from Manhattan. 1905 is the year, and 32488 is the certificate number. And we know from what we did just a minute ago that that's the right one. So here it is again. This is the same document. I just got to it through a different path. And you can see the document number up here. So, but as I said, the index to names is incomplete, and also it's an exact match. And so sometimes you can't find it that way. And then if you can't find it that way, the second choice is to search by certificate number. This is a two-step process. You must first locate the certificate number, borough, and year. And then you go to the website that we were just looking at to do the search. So finding the certificate number. The best, if you don't already have it, the best way to do it is use familysearch.org to find the record. For example, again, I'm using that same example of Arthur, son of Ignatz and Regina. And I go to this index of births on Family Search, and there's a link to that in the handout. And I end up here. Fill in, all right. I want to draw your attention to right here, this thing that says more options. You should always click on that because it will give you more fields to fill in. And the more fields you fill in, the better the search will be. Family Search does have smart searching. So again, if you have the name slightly wrong or the other information slightly wrong, it's going to give you the closest matches that it can find. So here I asked for Arthur Alexander, father Ignatz, mother Regina. And I came up with this list of possible matches. And again, the first one here looks promising. So I click over here on the right where it has the little piece of paper to see the actual document, the record. And this is all going to look very familiar. Arthur Alexander, here's my date of birth, birthplace Manhattan, parents, Hungary, but I still don't have the certificate number. And the magic to getting that is this little down arrow here on the left where it says document information. And you click on that. And the first thing there says CN, which means certificate number 32488. So what we want to take away from here is the certificate number, the date of birth, and the birthplace. Then we go to step 2. We follow that link to that page, which should now be familiar, except we're now at the top of the page. And we fill in, we're looking for a birth certificate, the certificate number, the borough, and the year. And we immediately get one result, which at first shows up like this, but then when I click on it, it looks like that. So that's how you do it by number. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen again for a minute and get out of. So are there any questions about the New York Vital Records? I've either totally overwhelmed you or I've been very clear.
Very clear. It just makes me wonder what would happen if all this crashed, you know?
Well, we would be back to where people were, before doing genealogy research before the internet, where they often had to travel to the location and look in the archives. My mother was from Pittsburgh and the family went back 5 generations in Pittsburgh. So I spent several afternoons in the city clerk's office or actually in the orphans court in Pittsburgh, looking through these giant ledgers for birth, marriage, and death records. And then having to put in a slip of paper and they would go, that was an index. And then they would have to go downstairs and pull the microfilm and bring it upstairs. And then I'd have to request a copy and
wow,
and pay for the copy. So that's how people did it before there was the internet.
yeah. So there is a backup.
The internet has really revolutionized.
Yeah.
Amazing. So we had this. Nancy, do you see in the chat? I put in the first thing in the chat is https://docs.google. You're not seeing that. All right, well, let me go back.
It's right above the question in your chat. You have to move the little bar up and down, the parallel bar. That shows in the window. Then you'll be able to see. I wrote back the answer.
The other thing is I can go back to the beginning and I'm going to go back to sharing screen. The other answer, Nancy, is, and I will make this full screen. All right, Nancy, if you want to write this down, tinyurl.com/ all caps MAB 1950 US Census USA. That should take you to the handout. Do you have that, Nancy? All right, Nancy, I can email it to you. I'm just making myself a note to do that. Because that handout gives you shortcuts to like a number of these things. Okay, is there any interest? I mean, are your brains full? Or do you want me to go back and do the example of looking for a 1950 census by address?
Miriam,
Yes.
do you know how far back the US Census goes? Does it go back to the mid 1800s?
It does, but in those early census documents, the only name that you'll see is the head of household. And then there'll be little check marks like there'll be like female age 0 to 10. Or male age, 16 to 20. But you, in the early census documents, you don't get the name of everybody in the household. That started, I think, about 1860.
Are they all digitized?
They're all available. Some of them are free on Ancestry. They're all available on families for free on FamilySearch.org. FamilySearch.org, you will have to create an account, but it's a free account. That's the Mormon website. And each census has slightly different questions. They all ask name, age, occupation. But some of the more detailed questions are different from census to census, depending on what was of interest at that time.
The questions what you showed us with all those questions, have they all been asked until now? Until now, there's a question about, there was a big hullabaloo, I remember.
Right.
But was it in existence all the time?
There was every 10 years, it's written into the Constitution from way, way, way back. There was a census. But the exact, and they all ask the same base, but exactly what questions got asked change from year to year. Like when we looked at the 1950 census, we could see that Marilyn Monroe worked last week and that she worked only 8 hours. Those questions are unique to the 1940 census. They didn't ask that early in other censuses.
Did all the time in the
1950 census.
In all the consecutive census from the beginning, was it asked whether people were born in this country, whether citizen or whether naturalized citizen, or whether not citizen? That was the problem recently.
Right. It has been asked for many, many years. I don't think it was asked in the very earliest census, but I certainly know 1900, 1910, 1920, those questions were asked. And I don't know off the top of my head, I don't know when they started asking those questions. Right. So it's not the first time they've asked that. And some censuses actually tell you the year that they immigrated and the year they were naturalized. Or let me just say one more thing about the census. The data is only as accurate as the person was giving the information to the census taker. Like we noticed that Marilyn Monroe cut a few years off her age, which was not uncommon. And so, but it is, and also by the time we see the information, it's actually already been transcribed at least once, because the census taker in 1950 had this big, huge portfolio that they would open and fill out the information for each family. And then they would go home, and that night they would transcribe it into the documents that we were seeing. So that information has already been transcribed once, at least once. So there's inaccuracies in what the person reported. There might be transcription errors. So while the census is an official document, it's not 100% accurate. And then if you're looking at the index, where we saw the street name was wrong, that's another transcription. So that's another source of possible error.
Marion,
Sorry.
Doris?
is there any reference to Ellis Island in terms of census? For instance, I know my grandmother probably went through Ellis Island.
The census might give you what she said was her year of immigration, but it would not give you the records for Ellis Island. Ellis Island has its own website, some of which is available on ancestry.com, but I've been able to log on to the Ellis Island website and actually see the ship's manifest from when my grandmother came over. But many of the images are also available on ancestry.com and maybe also be available on Family Search.
From what you say, if it's according to what people admit, then they can say that they're an American citizen and not be.
But it doesn't get them being in the census does not get them registered to vote.
Okay. Now, to be included, is it possible when a census taker comes, they don't ask to see everybody in the household?
No, they typically talk to one person. That person gives them all the information about everybody in the household.
And do you know since when a census taken has been done by computer or paper? We never had a visitor. I've been here for over 50 years and that we never had a census taker come to the house.
I can remember as a child a census taker coming to the house. Obviously this last census, a lot of us filled out a computer form, and you know, from what I was talking about with them creating the index using handwriting recognition, and somebody having to manually check that when in 70 years, when the 2020 census gets released to the public, it'll be much easier because they'll have the digital information rather than having to deal with the handwriting. In general, in genealogy, that was a big breakthrough when people started typing things rather than writing them by hand. And so if there are no, and again, as you can tell, I'm sort of addicted to the stuff. So feel free to reach out to me if you have any future questions, or if you want help with any particular, if you try doing the search and can't find the results or have problems, reach out to me and I can help.